Welcome back to another episode of Two Guys Watching Football, our training camp preview series. You may have seen the first episode that Cole Jackson did with Jeff Zrebeck of The Athletic. Awesome insight from Jeff, as always, regarding the team and just things that he's seen in the early part of the offseason over minicamp and OTAs and just other thoughts going into training camp. So if you haven't seen that, highly encourage you to check that out. And what we're doing is we're covering every position group on offense and defense. Maybe we should do special teams too. I don't know if that was part of it, but anyway, that's what we're doing. And so we're going to be talking about the defensive side of the ball today, particularly the defensive line and the outside backers. And I have the immense pleasure of being joined by James Ogden at NFL Ogden on Twitter. Let me do a quick little plug, James, for all of the many things that you do. I first sort of learned about James and his work from his Red Star Baltimore blog, redstarbaltimore.com. You should absolutely check that out. Tons of great information, long form writing, very, very deep analysis on there. If that's your thing, like it's my thing, I know you'll enjoy that. He's also a contributor over at Russell Street Report, has done a couple of pieces over there. So check those out. And I don't think it's, I'm not breaking any news. I've seen you share this on Twitter, currently enrolled in the Scouting Academy. So as a Scouting Academy alum myself, we always love to plug them. But without gassing you up any further, James, how you doing?
Not bad, MC. How are you?
I cannot complain, man. It is 8 a little after 8 a.m. Saturday morning here in the States. What time is it for you across the pond there?
Yeah, so for me, it's 20 past 1 in the afternoon. Just had my lunch. It's a little more sociable time than the first time you guys had me on.
Yeah, we're working that out. We're working that out. We've got a couple of international folks that we talk with and connect with, and so we're always kind of trying to work out these time differences. And wanted to do something that was a little more favorable to you because you've been getting up like super early to talk to us. So I wanted to try to balance the scales a little bit. So are you excited to talk some defensive line and outside linebackers?
Very excited to talk defensive line, outside backers. You referenced my participation in the Scouting Academy, and the first position group I chose was defensive line. I love the. I'm no Dave Gettleman, but I love the hog mollies up front.
You both share that appreciation, and I'm right there with you too. Line play on both sides of the ball really has become maybe my favorite groups to study and to watch, and that really kind of developed while I was at the Scouting Academy. I mean, you just mentioned it. You started right off there with the defensive line. I started off with wide receivers and DBs just because that was kind of what I was more comfortable with. But then as I went through the curriculum, I really fell in love with line play. Just, there's so much there to unpack that on the surface, it doesn't seem like it sometimes. Like you said, you're just thinking about these big old dudes pushing up against each other, but no, it's way more than that. It's way, way more. So much technique involved on both sides. So, it's super interesting.
Yeah, I think Duke Manyweather's got his O-line masterminds going at the moment, and I just love that it's called that because it is on both sides of the line. It's a mental game as much as it's a physical game, and we're going to dive into a defensive line that is exceptional with their mental processing.
Yeah, I always Twitter and IG stalk Duke because I love all the stuff that he does, and particularly when they have the O-line masterminds. And I know this year he had an opportunity, I think, for one or two people to sit in. It was like a contest basically, and I don't know who won or if he announced those winners, but I think they got a chance to kind of sit in on everything. And I'm like, man, that was I entered my name in there because I'm like, that'd be a dream come true just to hear, because they release, sort of snippets of it. After it ends, and you really can glean some nuggets from that. But man, just to be there and to hear everything that they're talking about would be amazing. So maybe he'll do it again next year, and maybe I'll get lucky next year. We'll see.
Yeah, I think I saw that a couple of college kids won it, so I think
Cool.
they're gonna like offensive line, like guys who are playing on the offensive line in college at the moment. So that's really cool.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Probably a better use than a 50-year-old dude who's not doing anything anymore. So I'm not quite 50 yet. I shouldn't put that on myself. I'm close though. I'm not far off. But anyway, without any further ado, let's jump in. We'll start with the defensive line. Let me share this real quick on my screen just so we can kind of share the names with everybody. And then let's hide this. So, as Ravens fans, you're obviously going to be familiar with many of these names. In the returning category, we've got Derek Wolfe, Brandon Williams, Calais Campbell, Justin Madubike, Justin Ellis, Broderick Washington, and Aaron Crawford. And in terms of additions, as we know, those of us who were fans of the draft and watched and followed the draft, they didn't draft a defensive lineman. They did sign a UDFA after the draft, Xavier Kelly, who unfortunately, suffered an injury during one of the mini camps or OTAs, and I think he's on injured reserve for some time now. But then they also signed Javan Swan, who was draft eligible this year, defensive tackle out of Indiana, who started at Stanford, if I recall correctly, and then transferred to Indiana. So they did pick up a couple of guys on the defensive line after the draft, but didn't use draft capital on a player this year. So I thought we would just kind of free flow this thing, and we can take it in any direction that you want to go. Now, I know when I talked to Cole about this, we're not necessarily doing like roster predictions, but I don't think that we're excluded from kind of talking about it in that way, because for me, it just helps me kind of frame the conversation to think about it in terms of, well, who I think is going to be on the team, right? As opposed to talking about somebody who maybe I don't think would be on the team. So, but we'll unpack all of that. Let me start by asking you this. So we know about the Monstars, right? Derek Wolfe, Brandon Williams, Calais Campbell. Didn't get many opportunities to see them on the field all together last year. Hopefully, this won't be such a heavily impacted COVID year, hopefully. And also, hopefully, they'll have injury luck. But what do you think about just those three guys and, what their impact, can be, what it was, the limited time that we got to see it last year, and what you think it can be?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that we should. It's funny. So doing the Scout Academy, you watch a lot of defense, a lot of players who you wouldn't necessarily watch anyway in the kind of course of watching the NFL, and some these guys are usually mediocre guys. They're not guys that you've heard of. They've been in the league 2 or 3 years, and they're feeling their way into the league. And you'll find yourself watching a whole game trying to find something to hold on to with some of these players. And I think the thing that Ravens fans probably take for granted, because I think I've taken it for granted, is just the sheer competence with which these three guys play the game, play the position of defensive line. When I'm scouting these guys and I'm looking at what they're doing, they are consistently getting upfield bursts. They are consistently getting their hands on offensive linemen first. They are consistently using their hands effectively. These guys are just the highest levels of competence. That the technical level of defensive line play from these three guys is so high, and I think we take it for granted, especially against the run. The way they play as a unit, I think that the game to go back and watch if people want to see kind of their ceiling as a 3 is the Titans game. We sprinkled in some Madubike in that game, but the 3 of them in that game, the Titans playoff game I'm referring to, the 3 of them in that game were just, it was a masterclass at defending the run. And I think that's the thing that stands out most to me about the Monstars, is that we have accumulated 3 guys who, over times in their careers have all been a little underrated, but who are all exceptional at what they do.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point about how we probably underappreciate just the technical competence because this is fresh in your mind, like you said, watching guys for the scouting academy. And this is no knock on anybody else. Obviously, if you've made it to the NFL and you're playing in games, you're already among the best on the planet of guys who play that game. So you're very good. But to see guys who are at a level even beyond that, right? They didn't just make it here. I mean, these guys, Campbell's going into year 14. I think Wolf's going into year 10. B. Will's going into year 9. So, and this isn't just like, guys who've kind of been spot starters or, these guys have been starters, consistent starters, quality starters, all pro level, guys, and with some of the guys for their entire careers. And so you think about that experience, they've seen so much. They understand the game in a way that just allows them to do what you saw in that Titans playoff game, right? Where, like you said, they literally dominated that game and they took one of the most impressive rushing attacks in the league. Obviously, the Ravens are right there too, but we know Derrick Henry and what they can do there and kind of that role that he gets on towards the end of the season, the last 2 years. And I mean, they shut it down. They absolutely shut it down. And you didn't even have to look that far back. You could look at the game that they played earlier in the season and, basically how he had the equivalent of a walk-off home run, at the end of that game, ripping off a long touchdown run. So when all three of those guys are on the field and in the game and healthy, it's a formidable group up front. And then you talked on Justin Madubuike, who I was going to go to next. So now you have this precocious young talent mixed into that group, and he's learning behind these guys, but also playing with them. And his snap count increased, as the year went on. And one interesting note, I'll turn it over to you to give your thoughts about him. I'd not seen this before, but it made a lot of sense when I read it. I think I told you beforehand, I was kind of going through the Ravens media guide and looking at the bios for some of these guys. Back when he was in college, he said he actually modeled his game after John Randall, Vikings defensive tackle. That made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can definitely see that in his game. But anyway, Justin Madubuike, going into year 2, obviously there's been a lot of buzz through minicamp and OTA around just how he looks, not just from the media, but from the players. Other players are like, hey, we think there's something special here. So what are your expectations for him going into year 2?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say with Madubuike that I think people just forget is, there was very little off season last season, and Madubuike missed the first handful of games. Did not have much practice time. Did not have much time on the field in preseason. So there was just nothing really for him to use. So he came into the league just the guy that came out of college. And so my expectations for him, one of the things I think about when you see the kind of sheer levels of competence that our defensive line plays with is the level of coaching that they get. So I kind of expect him to take a bit of a leap, a bit of a sophomore leap, just because of that, just because of having more time on the field. And the reason I expect him to take a leap is because he has such a rare combination of explosion, sort of lateral agility and foot speed. I think are the two things that stick out on tape athletically to me about him. That his balance and his pursuit from the backside is just ridiculous at times. So I think he has all of the raw tools, including a really natural leverage. He has all of the raw tools to be a standout in the league. I think for me there are some things to improve on. I think fans need to understand that he is a long way from his ceiling as a pass rusher. It's a considerable ceiling because of the tools I just mentioned. But he's a long way away from it still. He's a disruptor right now, and he's a nuisance at the moment. But, you know, I didn't see a whole lot of rush plan or a lot of a finish at all, really, with him this year. But there was a lot there to be excited about as a pass rusher. He was a wrecking ball as a run defender. Again, sort of, I think we saw as the year went on that he started to play as more of part of the unit as the year went on. But there were times when he lost gap discipline earlier on in the year. But we saw him play much more disciplined football towards the end of the year. But he was always a threat. He was always a wrecking ball. He was always in the backfield. So he was allowing others to make plays because he was getting such penetration. Didn't leave much meat on the bone for you then. Sorry, MT. What did you think?
Hey, no, we wanted to have you on to get your thoughts. So this is your
yeah, but I want to hear your thoughts too.
All right, well, we'll both get our thoughts out there, and that could get really lengthy for people. But no, what I was going to ask you, and I'll give some of my thoughts too. But what I was going to ask you, sticking on Madubuike and him as a pass rusher in particular, with your recent sort of studying of the D line, just to give people a sense of this, how much of a role, this is for you, this is going to be like a duh question, but like I said, we're trying to give people a sense. How much of a role does technique play in rushing the passer? I mean, obviously you think about guys who are high level athletes at their position in the NFL and for their size, but one thing that I've noticed is, as I studied it and continue to really study it closely and try to learn and understand, is technique plays such a critical role in separating, you know, even good pass rushers from like great pass rushers. And sometimes you think about the guys who kind of have those titles right now, whether it's Von Miller or Khalil Mack or an interior guy like Aaron Donald, and you're thinking, well, these guys are freak athletes, and they are freak athletes. But when you study them and you watch the technique that they display, you watch the pass rush plan that they use as they set up rushes over the course of a game, there's a high, and this is why I think we kind of keep using this phrase of technical competency. There's a high level of technique that goes into that. So think about that when you have these guys who are already like on the extreme end of the spectrum in terms of their athleticism for their positions, and then they combine that with the cerebral sort of technical part of the game. And I probably lost my question in there, but I guess it was to you. How much, as you've studied this recently, how much do you think technique plays a role in how successful you can be as a pass rusher?
Well, it plays an integral role. I think so to sort of demonstrate it, I think I take it back to Calais Campbell, I think, to demonstrate it, because I think we often get sort of, we started this out by saying, we sort of underestimate their competence, the three Monstars. And like Derek Wolfe and Brandon Williams are both great against the run. Derek Wolfe has some pass rush to him as well. But Calais Campbell's competence comes as a pass rusher, and he is technically extremely gifted as a pass rusher. Gifted is probably the wrong word for it. He's refined it over the years of his career. And I think, so one of the things that you see with him is he deploys his tools very effectively. So he's not a particularly twitchy guy, but he has the length is just ridiculous, and his vines for arms. So he uses those arms exceptionally well as a pass rusher, and you often see some pass rushers come into the league and struggle if their predominant usage is a swim move. If they use a swim, because sometimes they don't learn to do it tight. It's a little bit windmill, and those offensive linemen get up there into their armpit and drive it backwards. Calais Campbell is so quick off the ball. He has such great upfield burst. His hand is on the back of the offensive lineman's shoulder before they've even got out of their stance. And that for me is something that he and Madubuike share. Not the vine-like arms, because Madubuike is much smaller in terms of length, but his upfield burst, it's ridiculous. And that kind of twitchiness, that's outstanding. But he hasn't yet added Calais' technical competence to his play. So I think the thing for me is, when you watch Calais, his move that he uses is that arm over swim move, but he's got plenty of secondary moves that he's able to work off of with that arm over. He's got he's got heavy hands. He's got a particularly good club that he can work. So he works lots of moves off that. Madubuike at the moment just does what gets him past the offensive lineman at that particular time. He doesn't particularly have much of a plan, and so I would say technical competence is extremely important. You have to have the baseline of that athletic ability or some tools to be able to work to use. And that will get you so far. And that's why I think I say that Madubuike's considerable ceiling is still a long way off, because it's still about him being toolsy. He hasn't added what Calais has added over years and years in the league, and so I don't expect Madubuike to be there yet. But I do see some signs of it. Like I don't think we're seeing there's green shoots there. He is starting to develop it.
Absolutely. And the thing about Calais, the point you made about, sort of his fastball, right? His go-to pitch being that kind of arm over swim move. A guy with his height, you would think it wouldn't work. It's not supposed to work because he's going to expose so much of his torso and his chest that offensive linemen are going to be able to get to it and kind of shut that down. But like you said, because of his get off, because of how he gets off the ball, his upfield burst, he's beyond them. He's at least at their hip level, if, like you said, if not beyond, getting his arm on the back of their shoulder pad, where they can't get to his torso, right? There's nothing to get at that point. You're in full recovery mode at that point and just trying to kind of, maybe flatten him out or do whatever. And that's another thing that always kind of, really surprises me about his rush, is that when he gets to that point, if it's just not a clean win, which he has plenty of those, obviously, over his career, where guys, there's just nothing they can do at that point. But if they're at least in some sort of position to try to recover, he's still so powerful that they can't. They try to flatten him out. They try to push him laterally, and they just can't. They can't move him. He just continues to power vertically up the field. And I'm like, this is a strong individual. And that. I mean, these guys are all strong. They play on the defensive line. But since we've both been, you're in scouting academy, I've been through it. We can throw around some of these terms. Play strength, right? Is a term they talk about a lot in scouting academy. So we're not talking about your bench press reps at the combine, right? This is on the field functional strength. And when you see how he deploys that it's so clear, because you're like, wait a minute, they should be able to just move this guy laterally, right? And they can't. They just can't do it. And so he is just an impressive individual. You can see why he's had so much success. I mean, up until last year, and you have to factor in COVID and injury for last year, I think he'd had 11 consecutive seasons with at least 5 sacks. I mean, I think from his rookie year, where I think he was kind of dealing with injuries or some other things and maybe didn't play a whole lot that rookie year, he'd never had fewer than 5 sacks for 11 consecutive seasons. And we know in those Saxonville years, he was double digit a couple times there. So, I mean, think about that. He had no less than 5 sacks every year, and really more on the 7, 8, 9 sack end of the scale for 11 seasons as an interior, as primary. I mean, he played some DN. I think he's played more DN in probably some of the other places that he's been, Arizona, Jacksonville, than he has here. He played a fair amount of DN here. But you think about the versatility. I could just go on and on. As you can tell, I'm a huge Calais Campbell fan. I could just go on and on and on. And I don't want to shortchange any of the other guys, because guys like Brandon Williams and Derek Wolfe, they do the unsung stuff, right? They do the stuff that doesn't always show up, in terms of a counting statistic. Whether we know how valuable Brandon Williams is to this run game. If you're a Ravens fan, you know all too well how valuable he is to the run defense. And then Derek Wolfe, I obviously was familiar with him being an NFL fan, as he was a good player for the Broncos. But seeing him last year, I just had no idea just how good that guy really is, and how, he does his job at such a high level, right? He's where he's supposed to be. He's playing the correct technique. And that, when you talk about deploying tools, that's the kind of the first thing that comes to my mind. It's like, look, you can have a bunch of different tools, but do you know which is the right tool for the situation? Right. And so I think about, I don't know why this comes to my mind, but I think about a specific sort of block that he sees, like a reach block. Somebody tries to reach block him, because oftentimes he'll be at 3 technique, on the outside shoulder of a guard, sometimes on the backside of a run, and they're trying to reach him. And again, it's that combination of upfield burst. And the other thing that he does, which was really interesting to me, is, you'll hear coaches talk about, one of the most powerful positions to be in is same foot, same shoulder, right? So you're not, you're not stepping with say if you can visualize this, you're not stepping with your left foot and making contact with your right hand or right shoulder. That's not as powerful position as stepping with your right foot and right hand, right shoulder at the same time. And he does that. He dips that shoulder into them as they try to get across his face and reach him. And it's that same foot, same shoulder. And he gets underneath them, kind of wins that leverage battle, and he pops them up, and they can't reach him. They can't reach him, and he's just there. And if the front side of the defense does their job in sort of setting the edge and kind of, setting that picket fence on that side, and the back has to bend it back inside, he's there. He's consistently there, like all the time, because you can't reach him. You just cannot reach him. So yeah, I don't want to short shrift these other guys because obviously they're very, very good as well.
Well, let me give. So first of all, I just wanted to come back on your point about Calais with play strength, because I think it's a really kind of underrated thing that you kind of learn in the scouting academy, and I think that lots of people should know about. You can go on relative athletic score, check out the bench press of guys coming in, and you'll think, oh. And your point about Calais Campbell is really holds true, that once he gets that back shoulder and he gets into the backfield, you can't knock him off his path. His core strength is outstanding. And this is probably a little bit because of the size of his arms, but I just checked and he benched 16 times on the bench press, which is not good at all. But that's not an indicator of play strength, and the level of which Campbell plays is just outstanding. I think the other thing I just wanted to come in on was, you're absolutely right about Wolf and Brandon as well. Brandon Williams has been one of my favorite players for a long time. I do like the unsung heroes, especially on our defense, because there's lots of them. And you've spoken a bit to Derek Wolf there. And if Derek has been stout at the point of attack, and he's stacked and shared, and he's ready to make the play when the running back bends it back, and someone's built a picket fence on the outside, you can probably be sure that if you also look inside, you'll see Brandon Williams either occupying or splitting a double team. And I think the thing for me with Brandon is the regularity to which he splits double teams is staggering. You see space eaters come into the league, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about Jelly, who I think was really good last year. I'm going to use scouting academy language and say he was really solid last year. He didn't quite rise to being good, but he was solid. And you see what you see with Brandon is just a special level of run defense. You just don't see guys that are space eaters like that able to split double teams at the rate at which he does, and it really does. Splitting a double team can sometimes come with a loss of gap integrity, but it never does with Brandon. He understands his role in the defense, and he understands what he's doing, and he is a big reason for a lot of broken plays against our defense.
Yeah, whenever I've watched him, and we've been watching him since 2013. Leverage, strength, and quickness. Those are just some of the things that come to mind, because obviously he has kind of that natural leverage just with his height and his body type. But quickness, as people might not necessarily think of when they're thinking about a 330, 340 pound guy, but to be able to split that double team you do have to have some first step quickness to be able to do that. And he has it. And then, of course, the strength, right? You see that where oftentimes he's attacking one of those guys on the double team. And, the other guy's kind of trying to come down and bang his hip or push him over. And he doesn't move. It's like he's in concrete, right? They don't bang. Sometimes you see that with other guys, other defensive linemen who are trying to take on a double team, and you see the guy come down and bang him and just like knock him across, and there's no knock on him. I mean, you're taking on two guys, but the guys who are really, really proficient at taking on those double teams, there's different ways to do it, but one of the techniques that you'll see guys use is they'll corkscrew that knee, the play side knee, their gap, the side of the gap that they're supposed to be in. They'll corkscrew. Basically, I don't want to keep using too much terminology. They'll drop that knee, they'll drive that knee into the ground, right, and kind of use it as an additional anchor point. So you can't necessarily move them as easily. And that other offensive lineman, he wants to come off. Right. Yes, he's trying to push that guy over to sort of help his teammate there control the defensive lineman, but he's trying to come off and block someone else. And so the longer that he has to stay on you as the defensive lineman, the less time he has to come off and get to that other defender. And now that defender has an opportunity to make a play. So when you're a guy who takes on as many double teams, and that's a big part of your role, a lot of times that gets lost in, the value that provides. You're freeing up someone else to make a play. Think about the unselfishness it takes to know going into a game, hey, I'm going to see X number of double teams. And when you're as good as Brandon, you're going to be able to beat some of those and make your own play as well. But primarily, mentally that I'm setting up other people, right? That's really kind of what my role is in the defense. So just from a mental standpoint, that takes a certain kind of player too, to understand that, hey, I have to do this and I have to be disciplined in the way that I do it, because we've seen other guys who aren't, like you said, they're trying to spin out of there and they're doing different things because they're trying to make the play when their role may be to be stout, anchor, obviously beat that double team if you can. That's the first thing that you want to do. But if you can't, hold those two guys up so that second guy can't come off and get to a linebacker or a safety or whoever the other player may be. So just takes a special kind of guy to do that and to do it as often as he has for as long as he has. And think about having two of those guys, when they had him and Mike Pierce. It's crazy that you had both of those dudes who were pretty similar in terms of their ability to be able to do that. But let's quickly talk about these other guys, because I know we still got a whole nother position group to get to. But I think we can do this, relatively quickly, because we'll kind of just mix them all together. You talked about Jelly, Justin Ellis. So let me frame it as a question to you. So how do you see these other guys mixing in? Justin Ellis, Broderick Washington, both guys who played a little bit last year. Aaron Crawford, guy near and dear to my heart, he actually got some playing time in that second Steelers game when so many people were out because of COVID. And then Javan Swan. How do you see those guys sort of mixing into, I guess, one, having a place on the roster or practice squad, and then two, mixing into the rotation. So for those guys who you really project being on the roster, being on the active roster, how they might mix into the rotation.
Yeah, so I think Jelly Justin Ellis is an integral part of that defensive line. Obviously when you see the Titans game, I think it's the kind of usage that they'd like going forward in the big games, where sort of and people can go and look at. I'll give Yoshi. I never remember what the numbers are after his handle.
Oh, it's easy. Here's how you remember. I used to do this all the time too, but it's Ed Reed and Ray Lewis. 2052.
Oh, 2052. Okay.
There you go. That's how you
nice Okay. So Yoshi 2052, if you go onto his Twitter page, you can click onto the link on his profile and it'll take you through to the snap counts, and you can start to look at the snap counts of these guys over the course of the different games over the course of the year. And you can break it down lots of different ways. It's great. But if you look at the Tennessee usage, you see Brandon Williams got about 30 snaps. Calais Campbell and Wolf, both around 30 snaps again. And you saw Madubuike get about 20. 23, and Jelly was on 15. And I think that's kind of what they want going forward for, those big games and for prominent games. I'm sure they will mix in other guys through the year so that we don't get that kind of consistent usage all the time. But I think that's what they want. They want a rotation like that. The other thing we didn't say, and I'm going back to the other guys, but the thing we didn't say about Wolf, about the Monstars, about Wolf, Brandon Williams, and Calais Campbell, is the missed games. So Derek Wolf has not completed many seasons across his career, and is good for missing 3-4 games normally. We were pretty lucky last year that we got a pretty much full season from him. Brandon, I was surprised to see, has missed games in 3 out of the last 4 years. Calais Campbell's been pretty durable when he was in Jacksonville and Arizona, and has played pretty much a full season for the past 5 of the past 6 years. But last year was the year he didn't play a full season. So I think we are inevitable, and Matabike was obviously injured last year. So I think we are inevitably going to see some injuries. So these guys are going to play into it, and Jelly's a really important part of the rotation, let alone depth. Broderick Washington is interesting. Obviously, his he had some troubles with the law during the offseason, but I think it was just a misdemeanor in the end that he pled guilty to. So he's got some community service and maybe some NFL discipline coming down the line. But I'm pretty sure he'll make the roster. They kept rotating him in different games, and so I think they see something there that will keep him on the roster as depth. I'll let you talk about Aaron Crawford because he's your guy. But I'll quickly just land on the other 2 guys. I think Xavier Kelly, I know he's on IR at the moment. For me, coming out of, I think he was at Clemson and then Arkansas in college. For me, he was a very developmental guy. So I imagine that is a, broken nail IR stash situation, probably, just because he is such a developmental guy. He played high a lot. He was a high recruited guy. I think he was like a top 100 guy coming out of high school. But he just didn't really live up to the expectations and was very inconsistent. So although showed some flashes as a run defender, so I think they'll probably just stash him around for a while, see if they can develop him. Javan Swan is a really interesting one because I found from us talking to Denard, actually, from our friend Denard, who saw Javan Swan play for Indiana against Maryland. And other Maryland fans might have seen him play as this kind of rotational piece for Indiana as a sort of penetrating guy who just played in pass rush situations. And he looked pretty good doing that. But actually, interestingly, in the seasons before that, he was a kind of versatile piece on the Stanford defensive line and played 2-gapped a lot and played I thought was pretty stout against the run at times. I definitely thought he was draftable. So it will be interesting to see who they think they're drafting and who they're going to get out of Javan Swan. He could be some depth that sneakily gets on the roster. We always have a UDFA make the roster. And the thing that's interesting about this defensive line group is that it isn't very young. And there's some question marks over the one guy who is young that I've talked about in terms of Broderick Washington. So you never know. I think it will probably be 7 guys up top that make the roster, although 7 might be too many on the defensive line. So they may try and get Aaron Crawford onto the practice squad again, but I think they'll struggle. And MC, you can talk about him.
Well, for the sake of time, I won't wax super poetic on him, but maybe what I can do is in the description for this, I think I tweeted out, I forget how many snaps he had in that Steelers game, but I think I tweeted out all of them. It wasn't that many. It might have been like 10 or 11 or something like that. But I'll summarize it this way. I think he's best suited as a nose tackle, head up nose, but a guy who could play a shade. Probably not necessarily the guy that you'd want to see at 3 technique, but you know how the Ravens deploy their guys. Guys kind of play a little bit everywhere, but very similar to Brandon Williams. I don't want to compare them because, Coach Harbaugh says when you make comparisons, you always diminish somebody. But just in terms of skill set, body type, if you're familiar with Brandon Williams, as all Ravens fans are, think about that, right? Very similar in terms of being able to take on double teams, being able to split and penetrate. being able to hold up at the point of attack. Similar skill set. That's what I want to say. When I say similar, not similar players, but similar skill set, and what really the skill set that you want to see at that nose tackle position, which is an important position in their defense. I mean, when they play their 3-man front, which they play a lot. Well, I shouldn't say 3. It can be a 5, but it's a 3-down look, and you could have 2 outside backers, so it could be a 3 or a 5. But when they play that 3-down, 5-down look, there's usually someone head up on the center, and so that's an important role for their defense because they really want to control that center. So I'll leave it there with him, like I said, for the sake of time, and we'll switch over to the outside backers now. I think I know how to do that. Oh, look at that. Okay, so we'll go through the names real quick, and then we'll kick it back and forth just like we did for the defensive line. So Pernell Mcphee, everybody loves Fee, so he's back again. Jalen Ferguson might be a little polarizing for some folks. Tyrus Bowser, who I think used to be in that polarizing category, but now is out of the polarizing category. Aaron, and I got to make sure I try to pronounce. I think it's Adeo. Aaron Adeo, Chauncey Rivers, and then of course the rookies. First round pick Odafe Owe, and then pick. Was Dalen a 4th or 3rd rounder?
Was he 5th? I think he was 5th
rounder. I think he was 5th rounder. Daley Hayes out of Notre Dame. So let's start up top with the returning guys. I think that we probably have a pretty good feel for who slots in to sort of which of those outside backer positions. I think people can probably pretty clearly see that Tyrus Bowser is probably going to be the starting Sam, and Pernell Mcphee is probably going to be the starting rush. Right. I mean, I think we feel pretty comfortable with projecting that. But it's really kind of how these other guys will slide in and mix in where it gets interesting. But, before we unpack all of that, let's just talk about some of these guys. So for you, when you look at that returning group, and again, take it in whatever direction you want, whether it's who I'm projecting as those starters in those positions, or who you think might be in those positions. What do you see with this group going forward? Obviously, they lose Matt Judon, very productive guy in the defense. Yannick Ngakoue wasn't here for long, but had that pass rush pedigree. Maybe didn't quite meet the expectations that a lot of fans had here, but again, one of those things, you and I can probably appreciate this when you go in and you watch, a lot of really effective rushes, right? They didn't necessarily end in getting home with a sack, but they impacted the quarterback, which is really what you're trying to do in pass rush. But anyway, so back to these guys that are here. So what do you see kind of out of this group, how it's sort of changed a little? I mean, it's the same. Some of the same guys are here, but some guys are going to be stepping into larger or different roles.
Yeah, I think that's why you're right to mention Ngakoue and Judon and Jihad Ward as well.
Yes, that's right. Very good.
Because they, that's a really large swathe of snaps that have walked out the door. So the guy I want to talk about most in this bit is Tyrus Bowser, who I think, some fans might have lost the sort of the fact that Bowser has become a really excellent outside linebacker in this league. And I think that the reason he's so good and I thought was going to be coveted, and I was surprised that we got him back at the price we did, but I would have paid more for him, I think, is because he's such a good all-around outside linebacker now. And I think the leap that he made last year, and the thing you want to do is if you're not yet a Tyrus Bowser stan, if you're not yet somebody who loves Bowser, just next season, or even now, go back to last season, but definitely next season, when you're watching a game, just watch Bowser, just watch him and everything that this defense asks him to do, and how well he does everything. It's ridiculous, really. When you're evaluating him, you almost have to start. You almost have to look at every single the traits associated with every single defensive position to be able to effectively evaluate him. You can't just look at him as a guy who rushes the passer. You can't just look at him as a guy who sets the edge. You can't just look at him as a linebacker. Sometimes he's literally playing defensive back. He's playing safety at times. So the guy's just, he has taken a big leap. He took it last year, and I think the place in which he took the biggest leap was his mental processing. He was already had a high level of football intelligence, but he now processes stuff much quicker. He absolutely understands his place in the defense, which is a very complex one. But I imagine Wink absolutely adores him because the things he can do that he allows the defense to be able to do. So I think you watch him in coverage, he moves ridiculously well in coverage for his size, his lateral ability, his lateral agility, his change of direction, his hips are really smooth for his size. He moves so well in space, and you can trust him covering all types of receiver. So that's a real weapon to have. I think that he had a lot of that already coming into the league, and he's developed it, but that was a solid point for him already. The thing that he started to develop is he started to add that football intelligence to his pass rush. So we talked earlier about fastballs and change up and curve, and thinking about a pass rusher who has a go-to move, but is able to work off that move because the go-to move is going to get nullified by the best guys in the league. And Bowser's an interesting guy because you'll see guys like, in baseball, you'll see guys like Trevor Bauer who really work off their secondary offerings and more so than their fastball. Bowser's almost developed into that kind of guy where his tool in the belt is his speed. But he very rarely uses that speed around the edge it is his fastball, but he doesn't use it as much as his changeup and his curve because he started to work out that he can use just the threat of that to come inside, to work inside across the face of the offensive tackle. You can see him convert speed to power and go straight into an offensive lineman's chest, but then work around the outside and work back to his speed and rip out around the outside. I'm really impressed with the development of his rush plan as a pass rusher, but he doesn't get that many opportunities to rush because he's so good at doing everything else. And he's added enough play strength now to be able to play the run pretty well too. So I just think Bowser is a really underappreciated guy, and I think across the league, maybe not so much in Raven circles, but just watch him. He does so much for this team, and he's going to get a significantly increased snap count this year. And I think we'll start to see a lot more recognition for him league wide as he starts to play at this high level across a much higher proportion of snaps.
I agree with that. I think he's going to become a name that even fans become more familiar with. I think teams probably are familiar with him now. I think fans are going to become more familiar with him. But he is, and you summarized it in all the different things that he does. He is a true outside linebacker in the truest sense of that position. I mean, in my opinion, a lot of systems that kind of still use a 3-4 sort of structure, those outside backers are primarily pass rushers, right? I would say 70-30, maybe even 80-20. Sort of the ratio to pass rush to dropping into coverage. Whereas a guy like him, and even going back to Matt Judon, Bowser probably a little bit more, they're probably closer to like 60-40, somewhere in there. They're going to rush. Bowser might even been closer to like 50-50. But, they're true outside backers. I mean, you have to kind of go back to sort of older defenses to see guys who do all the different things that they're asked to do, because you just don't see it as much. Like I said, these guys are primarily like pass rushers nowadays, and they might drop, 4 or 5 times a game or 10 or less for sure. Maybe I'm being too low at 4 or 5, but 10 or less for sure. And these guys might drop, close to 20 times a game, depending on, on the game situation. And then obviously they're playing the run. You talked about that. So it's just, he came in as a real high-level athlete. I mean, you talked about relative athletic score earlier. His was among the highest that year for his position. So he came in as a really high level athlete. And then you just were watching the development to see, okay, when will this athleticism really kind of translate into football acumen? Not that he didn't have it. Obviously, he played at Houston and they dropped him in coverage a ton there at Houston as well. But NFL football acumen, which is different than college football acumen. When would you see that athleticism translate? And you gradually saw it translate each year. And then last year, it was almost like, I think about it like walking up, a set of stairs, and you're going up like one step at a time. And like last year, he like took 2 steps, right? He like jumped over the step last year, especially towards the end of the season as the year went on. You're like, man, the game appeared to be slowing down for him. He really was seeing things clearly, processing things very quickly, and not thinking, just reading his keys, trusting his keys, and reacting. And when that happens, when you already have someone with, his athletic profile, you've got a chance for something really special to happen, when that happens. So I'll touch on some of these other guys. Pernell Mcphee, everybody loves Pernell. I mean, it just, he is, when you hear that phrase, play like a Raven, he's one of those guys that comes to my mind immediately because he's super physical. Super physical. And you saw it. We referenced that Titans playoff game earlier. You really saw it in that game. I mean, he was like a man possessed who was not going to be denied. And I think that kind of game, that's his game, right? That is right up in his wheelhouse, where it's going to be physical, having to defend the run first. Those are the games where he really can shine because he's got a few years under the belt now at this point in his career, and has had some injury issues, and so you kind of have to have him on a bit of a pitch count at this point in his career. But if you can do that, and you can use him, situationally, I think there's still some gas left in that tank with him. What do you think about Pernell and where he's at this point in his career?
Yeah, it's funny. He's we talked before about Wolf and Campbell and Williams being just highly competent players and a high level of technical ability, and McPhee is there too now. You see sometimes, I think, sports people in lots of different sports go through sort of periods where they have to adjust their game and they have to change as they get older. And I think Pernell Mcphee has just done that. There's still elements of his play from when he was first here. So there's still some explosion left, and obviously there's still all that power. But he's added just an element of savvy to his game. His rush plan is that we talked about before. His rush plan is now very good. He has a whole arsenal of moves to be able to use. But he doesn't have to deploy them that much because his play against the run is outstanding, and he's another part. We talked before about building that fence to set the edge. He's just a master of that, and he's a particular master of pursuit from the backside. When a play goes play side, he's coming in. He's not the quickest guy, but he's coming in and he's playing at such. We talked before about play strength being a sort of scouting academy term. Play speed is also a scouting academy term, and it's a combination of your speed, but also your ability to process the game quickly. And he's just at that level now where it just comes naturally to him, and he will do the same job that he did last year for us. And I'm pretty happy with him just slotting in as the starting rush to start with, but also rotating probably pretty heavily with some of these younger guys that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, for my money in this group, because I don't want to put a big burden on the young guy, who hasn't taken a snap in the NFL right now. But for my money in this group, he's the best point of attack run defender in this group. And when you talk about runs that come his way and he has to set that edge, a lot of times you'll see guys do that. Against particularly, you can probably visualize like a zone run, like against the Titans outside zone. Somebody's got to get outside that tackle or that tight end and kind of set that edge. And you picture guys who do that and kind of hold that point. He takes that guy at times and throws him inside, like literally throws him across a gap. And I'm like, you just don't see people do that. You're taking another NFL player, quality player, and just tossing them aside. It's impressive stuff. But now,
he's
go
he's
ahead.
no, I was just gonna say he's a grown ass man. Like he will take people apart, and it's a violent and physical edge, and you aren't getting outside Pernell Mcphee. You'll count on the fingers of one hand the amount of times someone gets outside him in a season.
That's a perfect word. You said violence. That's a perfect word to describe his game. It is violent. If you had to pick one word, there is violence. He chooses violence when he's on the field. He absolutely chooses violence. So I wanted to save the rookies to the end because I know there's a lot of kind of buzz and excitement, especially when you have a first round pick. But let's talk about Jalen Ferguson a little bit because, like I said, I think it's a little polarizing for some folks. Not for me. You and I know we talked about this. I kind of went back and watched all of his snaps, and really wanted to get an understanding of, his progression from year one to year two. Now, another one of those guys who, like all of these guys, were impacted by not having a full off season. Think about going into your second year and the benefit of having a full off season, what that would do after you had, a rookie season under your belt. And he really didn't have that. But I think what I saw from him was a guy who was still continuing to progress. I know a lot of people, they think about him setting, the sack record back in college and the whole sack daddy nickname. They're like, hey, where the sacks at, sack daddy? And, I think what I saw, and again, people may take this as making an excuse, but what I saw, again, was a guy who had a lot of effective rushes, a lot of close calls, but didn't get home right as much as as you probably expected. Now, some of that was just situational, balls out quick, or maybe he gets chipped or something happens late in the rush, and then some of it was on him. To be quite frank, some of it was we talked about the term pass rush plan several times here. He is still refining that and developing that, because at times it's not really clear what the pass rush plan is. It's almost like, all right, I had a move in mind, right? I see the way this guy is setting me. I see his pass set. Here's the move I want to deploy against that. That gets stopped. I have no other counter. I have no other plan in mind, right? For if that happens, it's almost like, hey, this has to work. And if it doesn't work, well, I'm just kind of gonna, YOLO it out here. And you can't really be successful. You can't really have consistent success that way. I mean, every now and then you'll be able to pull something out of your what and kind of make something happen there. But the most consistent pass rushers have that plan because they understand that. They understand that, yeah, I want to work this move versus this particular pass set, or I want to cause the lineman to react in a certain way. You think about like an outside rush, a speed rush, right? You're trying to get them to open up outside so that you can either use that against them, right? That momentum as they're continuing to set outside and away from you, use that against them, or maybe you want to work back inside. So it gives you some options there. But if that doesn't work, if let's say they get out there, they stay square and they're in a position to really shut down that outside rush, well, you've got to have a plan for if that happens. You've got to have a counter for if that happens. And that's just, sort of the good level of rusher, right? They have that plan. The great level has a plan for the plan, because they're like, all right, they shut down the outside rush. They shut down the counter move. I'm going third level now. Those are the great guys. And I'm not putting that on him as a guy going into his third year. But again, what I saw was a guy who continued to get comfortable with additional moves and techniques in games. I think people know he has a pretty solid bull rush. I think people know that about him. And that's kind of one of the things that people lament is like, hey, can we see another move? He did show some other moves at times last year, but again, it wasn't consistent. And I think there's just a comfort thing for him. It's like, I don't really quite trust it. You know what I mean? There's a comfort and there's a discipline, sort of thing that I think I was seeing last year. Whereas when he reads his key and he trusts what he sees and he understands what his assignment is, he will wreak havoc. There are plays where, he tackles for loss and stuff like that, but when he gets undisciplined with his eyes and he's seeing too much, he's not focusing on his key. He doesn't really clearly understand what his assignment is because maybe there's been some kind of pre-snap motion or late shift or something like that. And he's a little unsure now about, okay, well, what that was my assignment. What's my assignment now? All the things that you would expect a young player to kind of struggle with. And, particularly in this position and in this complex of a defense, all of that made sense to me. So I'm optimistic because, again, I see the flashes. I saw the progression of, hey, he's adding different tools that I didn't see in 2019. I did see in 2020, but it's about consistency and it's about discipline. But what are your thoughts on Jalen and what you think we could see from him this year?
Yeah, I don't have you hit the nail on the head with most of those. I don't have loads more to add, but I think one of the things that I thought was interesting was just the way he. So lots of people thought that he coming out of college didn't have much bend, but I don't agree with that. I think and even coming out of Louisiana Tech, I did think he had enough ankle flexion. He was able to corner pretty well. And I think that's proven out at the pro level. I think the thing that was the biggest thing that needed to be improved coming out, which has borne out in what you've just said, was his rush plan. And his rush plan in college was really simple. It was, I'm going to come through you, and if I can't come through you, then I'm going to go around you, and I'm going to go around you because I'm playing Conference USA opponents every week, and they can't deal with the speed I have. But that speed was never going to translate to the pro level. So you almost had to rebuild him as a pass rusher, and the way he wins, because I'm not sure he was that refined as a power rusher coming out. Because he could so often go to that secondary offering and go and run around the guy with like a speed rip, basically. He never really had to refine that bull rush, that power rush. And so he's had to do that at this level while also finding some secondary and third offerings that are actually going to work for him at this level. So I think you're right. I think I've seen some development with him. And I specifically think I've seen some development with his processing and his understanding of his place in the defense, which he understood very well at Louisiana Tech. Like, I was not worried about his football intelligence coming out. So I did expect him to get there, and I think we've started to see him get there. And like you say, people don't see the sack numbers, so they think he's not contributing. But there's plenty of times when he is, and he's making a big impact on the play. So I do see some more growth from him. I also worry for him that he could be quickly overtaken. Like, if he doesn't continue to develop, then we've got a couple of guys who I really like, who we brought in the draft, who could overtake him pretty quickly.
And we're going to talk about those guys now. I mentioned earlier the show that Cole did with Jeff Zrebeck. One thing, just as we tie the bow on the Jalen Ferguson sort of discussion there, one thing Jeff said was that Wink really likes Jalen Ferguson. So there's something there. If Wink likes him that much and, feels that confident in what kind of player he can be, then there's something there. And yeah. Jeff said, hey, look, that guy knows more football than any of us will ever know. So if he feels that way, we probably should keep an open mind a little bit about him. Because I've seen some people who said this is kind of like a make or break training camp for him. And I'm like, I don't know if we're quite at that point yet. But anyway, let's talk about these two young guys. I don't want to short shrift anybody, but I think we know Aaron Adeye and Chauncey Rivers. They got to play. Those guys got to play a little bit in that Steelers game as well. That was the one good thing I think that came out of that COVID game. I mean, they had a chance to win it. You really thought that they were going to be able to pull that out with kind of the backup crew that they had in there. But a lot of these young guys got a chance to play, like a real game situation, which I thought was pretty valuable. But we'll see those guys kind of in a similar role to last year, right, where they're probably trying to carve out spots on the practice squad. So now, the first round pick, Odafe Oweh, a guy near and dear to our hearts, particularly you and I gushed about him a lot. And I think primarily, people know about the athleticism, that got talked up a lot, obviously the pro day, and for, take that for what it's worth with, how pro days were done this year, and whether you, believe in the validity of the numbers or not. But you and I, that was, I don't even want to say secondary. It was lower than that for you and I. We were just like, yeah, that's whatever. Just watch the tape. Watch the way this guy moves. Watch what he does on the field, and primarily as a run defender. We talked about Pernell Mcphee earlier and how good he is against the run. I don't want to do comparisons because I think that's unfair. But Owe is a guy who extremely, extremely disruptive in the run game, and really probably just scratching the surface on his ability to do that. Because again, he's a guy who had a basketball background. I think he only played 2 seasons at Penn State, if I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3.
Yeah,
I might be right.
I was just going to quickly put it in there. Like he's played about just over 700 snaps. Like that's basically one college season is what he's played.
So think about what we saw in that context and where he can go, the room for growth that he still has in all parts of his game. And when you look at a guy with that kind of athletic ability moving into this defense and all of the different ways that they can design opportunities for him, it's hard not to be excited. But let me start with you. What you saw from him in college and what you see as his fit in the Ravens defense.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, though. We just, both of us kind of the athletic ability, while great, is secondary to me. I'm excited about what he brings as a run defender, and I'm excited about his potential as a pass rusher. There's all the stuff about the no sacks last year, but he did have significant, I think he had 5 the year previously. And as I said, I think that all of this should come with the context of this guy's played 700 snaps of football. I think as a pass rusher, for me, I compare him a little bit to like a newborn baby animal. Like as soon as they come out, they're sort of like testing out all 4 of their legs and like trying to get on their feet, and then they get on their feet and they're able to. And I'm not talking about his like how he looks on the field. I'm talking about his ability as a pass rusher, because if you watch. So I've watched every snap he's played at Penn State. And if you watch them in order, what you see is him doing that. He's trying out different moves, and it's almost like you're seeing him do stuff that he's tried on the practice field last week and put it straight into a game. And you're seeing it almost for the first time. And he's developing a rush plan, but he hasn't yet worked out what's good. Like he hasn't yet worked out what is his most comfortable weapon, because he has such a combination of speed and power. Like his toolbox, he could do what he wants. He can do whatever he wants with pass rush moves, and he just hasn't had the reps to be able to, the live game reps to be able to develop these moves to the point where you'll see him use them effectively, and when I say effectively, get home. But he has everything you look for in that sense. I've seen some criticism about his bend. I don't really agree with that. I think, occasionally you didn't see him corner very well and finish at the quarterback, but I saw plenty of bend in the run game that would make me not concerned about that at all. And then you take yourself to his run defense, which is like, it is reminiscent of McPhee. It is violent. And he will, the thing that's really interesting about that was he was a situational pass rusher in the first year he played at Penn State. And he played the run like a handful of times, just because they were putting him in obvious passing downs. But when he did get to play the run, he was great. And you were like, what? Why are you not starting this guy full time? Like, why is he just coming in to play the pass? And then he showed that when he played the run his second year at Penn State. And I think what people need to remember a little bit, because the other criticism I've seen of him is his first step, which I also don't buy, because the other sort of important context to that 700 snap thing that we talked about before is the fact that he had to read run first at Penn State. And it's pretty obvious when you watch the tape that that's what he was doing. So, and that's what he'll do in the Ravens defense as well. So I think he's ideally fit. He's an ideal fit for the scheme. I think he's a really interesting guy. He's almost a really interesting case study for this scheme of a guy who is a little bit lighter. The guys who've had most success from the rush spot in our scheme have generally been heavier. But he's the twitchiest guy we've ever had, which, is and that athletic ability, like I said, really does open the toolbox for him as a pass rusher. And so I can't wait to see how he develops. I really hope people temper their expectations from his first year, because I do not see a dominant first year from him. I just don't. And I don't think that means he'll be a bust. I think we need to be patient with him. But there's something really special there, and I think the reason that they could have probably traded back and still got him and added a few more extra picks. I think the reason they didn't trade back and do that was they wanted to get that guy, but I think they also wanted the extra year, because I think that fifth year will be crucial. Like I don't think we'll see lots from him in his first year, so they want to get some extra time out of him. I think he'll rotate in and play a lot because he can play the run so well that's the kind of. Sorry, I'm going on a little bit here, but that's I love OA. I think that's the beauty of him as a developmental prospect, because you can see guys come into the league that are these developmental, twitchy pass rushers, and they take a long time to develop because they can't get on the field because teams don't trust them to play the run. Whereas OA will play the run extremely effectively day one, which will allow him to get on the field and get reps and develop himself. And that's something that you don't get out of these kind of developmental pass rushers that have busted over the years, going back to like Vernon Golston. These guys couldn't get on the field because they weren't playing the run very effectively. And that's not a problem.
Yeah, I know we keep focusing on that, and people are probably like, why do you keep talking about run defense? Well, because when you look at pass rushers, and you just made the point, for the young pass rushers, rookie pass rushers, you just don't see them play the run at the level that a guy like him, even with the limited amount of snaps he's had in college, has played the run. I mean, typically what I see when I, have started to really kind of hone in on this over the last few years is, okay, they might be okay in run defense, and there's probably, or worse than okay, but then there are guys that kind of fall into different categories. So there's those categories, but then there's, let's say you're okay at. There's usually one area you're better at than the other. You're better on the front side, or you're better on the back side. He's as good. He's equally good on both sides. It doesn't matter whether he's at the point of attack and he's the one that kind of has to take on blocks or set the edge. He did that at a really high level. And the backside is just freakish. I mean, you just don't see guys make plays that he makes from the backside. It's too far away from you. You're not supposed to be able to make that play, and he's making it. I understand that is college, and it's a different level of athlete in the NFL and scheme and technical competency. We've talked about a bunch here, so I get that. But they're just plays, and you and I probably shared both of them on some of them on Twitter over after the draft, maybe even before the draft, where he's running down runs away from him, whether it's an outside zone run away from him or just, some outside run concept away from him, where he might have been at the 5 technique, outside shoulder of the guard, opposite that run. So we're talking, 4 or 5 gaps away. And he's chasing that run down. And, you see that at times. And guy, maybe chases that run down, but the ball carrier is 4 or 5 yards down the field. He's doing this at the line of scrimmage. You just don't see it. you just don't see it. So, I know, we're both really excited about that prospect, but I think another really important thing that you said was to temper expectation, right? You can have this excitement about what you've seen and what you think it can be, but then also still be reasonable with your expectations, right? I'm certainly not thinking, okay, this guy is going to come out with 8 to 10 sacks and a bunch of tackles for loss. Look, if that happens, obviously we'll love it. We'll all be ecstatic because that means that he was everything we were hoping he would be. But I think that what I'm trying to learn over the last couple of years about all rookies, but rookie pass rushers in this defense in particular is, you've got to give it time. Got to get it time. It's a complex system. There are a lot of things going on. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to process. And so you have to give that time. So that ability, we kind of touched on this with Tyrus Bowser, that ability can be there and has been there. But for it to, fully shine, it takes time for them to kind of learn and for the game to really kind of slow down for them so that now that ability that had always been there can really come through, right? Unfiltered. It's like unfiltered light, it's kind of diffused a little bit in that first year or two because they're still learning and they're still processing. And so that can actually slow you down. We talked about play speed. You might physically be faster than another player. Like this might be a good juxtaposition here. Him compared to a guy like Pernell Mcphee. Obviously, Odafe is a better athlete in terms of speed and quickness and agility than Pernell at this point in his career. But there are probably going to be plays where Pernell looks faster, looks quicker. Like, oh man, how did he do that? How did he get? Because of the processing, right? That's that play speed component. It's not just the physical part, it's the mental part. And that mental part can give you an edge and allow you to actually be faster and to be places, to get yourself into position, when you see plays before it even happens, because you've diagnosed it, you've seen it, you've put all of the pieces together and hey, A plus B equals C. And so you're there. So I think that's the thing that an important point that you made about, be reasonable with be excited. Nobody's going to tell you not to be excited. But just try to be reasonable with your expectations, because again, all of that context of basically only playing 700 snaps, now coming into the NFL and everything we just talked about in terms of the complexity of what he has to learn, all of that has to be mixed and baked in together. And I think it's gonna take some time, or at least I want to give it some time. Maybe it won't take any time. You never know. But I want to give it some time. So lastly, let's touch on Daley Hayes, and then we'll wrap this up. He's a guy who, in his own words, because he did some pressers through mini camps and OTAs, said that they were really kind of giving him reps at Sam, right? At Sam linebacker, and then kind of like a rush end in sub packages, which is kind of what I expected going back watching this film at Notre Dame. Like, yeah, that you could see a really natural fit for him in those roles. But let me just turn it over to you, give you the floor. What did you think about that pick? I wasn't sure where he would go in the draft, because when I watched him, I said, I remember telling some of the other guys that we talked with about this. I said, there's something untapped about his game. You can see it and you're like, man, there's really something there. But for whatever reason, it just didn't manifest itself as consistently as I might have thought, because you'd see a flash and you're like, wow, that dude's got something. He's got some juice. And then, there would just be like these quiet periods throughout games. And you're like, well, that's kind of weird. I saw something that didn't kind of line up, when I saw that flash, that doesn't kind of line up, that he would kind of, I'm not going to use the word disappear, because I don't know he did that, but just quiet, right? Just quiet throughout those games. But what did you think about Daley Hayes' game in college, and then kind of, how you project his fit into the defense?
Yeah, we probably need to be a little bit careful about length here, because I could talk about Daley Hayes all day.
The Daley Hayes, the man, could just be a podcast all on its own.
And that's the thing. So I prepared I wrote a piece about Daley Hayes. I've done reviews on most of the draft picks. I want to read one paragraph from my piece, which was, he taught twice weekly classes to 4th and 5th graders on how to resolve conflicts healthily. He worked food banks and homeless charities, volunteered at boys and girls clubs, mentored at a juvenile detention center. So I know a lot of athletes do a lot for their community, but he really did an awful lot in the South Bend community. And when you look, if you just want to Google him, he did a speech on Juneteenth, which was on the Juneteenth rally at Notre Dame, which was absolutely, I mean, the kid he's such a leader, and not just a leader of men in a football team, but also a leader on campus. Like he seemed like people gravitated towards him. So I'm really excited about the man, and that's maybe a nice segue into his play on the field, because he is also a grown man. So I know we've talked a lot about run defense, but just one thing with Daley Hayes, he played. So the Football Outsiders, if people don't know, is a website that looks at efficiency of different plays, different units across college and the NFL. And the number one of the stats I look for, and I know that the Ravens look for, I don't know that they look specifically at Football Outsiders, but I know that they look for players that play as part of a unit well. And Notre Dame's stuff is the amount of times a run was stopped for 1 or 2 yards or no gain or behind the line of scrimmage. Notre Dame's stuff rate was number 1 in the nation by a considerable distance last year. And if you watch their defense, Daley Hayes is a massive reason why that was the case. He sets a hard and physical edge, and he throws people around. There's a play, I think if you go back on my Twitter, you can find it, where he just blows up an offensive tackle. And he did that very consistently. It was in the pass rush where he was very, very, very inconsistent. And like you said, there were flashes where you're like, wow, that there's something there. And then there were times where he went missing for long periods of the game. I think he will translate really well as a Sam. I think he's going to get on the field quite considerably. He plays like a Raven, like on tape. He really does. So I think he's going to get on the field quite a lot in his first year. I think when you think about the way the snap counts will have to be manipulated with this group next year, you'll see that Bowser plays a lot more snaps. And I think Daley Hayes can slip into some of those snaps that will be vacated by Bowser playing more snaps, if you see what I mean. There will be like a developmental Sam snap count that's there waiting to be taken, and I think Hayes will take that. I don't think he'll ever be Bowser in coverage. He's pretty tight-hipped, but he could be Judon in coverage, which is serviceable. So more than serviceable, really. So I think that's what he will end up being. And I think we could, for me, and I it's going to sound like we've got really carried away with a number of the draft picks, but I have criticisms of the other draft picks. But with Hayes, I do think it's one that we could look back on and say, oh, wow, like I didn't know he was going to be as valuable as Jarrett Johnson, but he ends up being like that, a piece on the defense that's incredibly unsung and probably never gets paid at the level that he should for the competence that he'll bring, but I think he'll develop over time. And I love that video from training camp where he's Ghost playing the rep behind Elway. And I think that sort of speaks to the kid and the character. And I would just bet on him all day to end up being a productive NFL starter.
Yeah, I think the character part is huge. I remember that you sharing that Juneteenth video speech with me, and I watched it, and I was just blown away by it, as you were. And it's just in all of these aspects, right? You talk about taking that mental rep there behind Owe, the things that you discussed that you saw on tape at Notre Dame. When you think about this group as we're looking at it here, you don't necessarily see another, sort of natural Sam type of player other than him. I mean, again, we talked about Owe's athleticism, probably do damn near anything he wants. But it looks like, Dalen is kind of the more natural Sam, in this group. So just, you mentioned, for that reason alone, you would expect, for him to have a role this year, because, what Wink hasn't done is played anyone on the D-line or in the outside backer 100% of the snaps. He just hasn't done it. Even a guy like Judon, who you felt like was on the field for a ton of snaps, he was on the field for a lot of snaps, but he didn't play 100% of the snaps. And so I wouldn't expect that. I expect, like you said, Tyus' snap count will obviously go up from what it has been, because he's kind of stepping into that role. But I don't expect him to play 100% of the defensive snaps. So, just by nature of that, there's probably a slot there for Daley Hayes. But anytime that somebody has shown that kind of character and work ethic, competitiveness, like you said, I'll always bet on that, right? Whether it works out or not, hey, there's a lot of vagaries in the NFL and why things, why players have success and why some don't. There's, you can go down that road and everybody kind of has a unique set of circumstances, but I will always, always, always bet on those things. And as much as this guy, he's just starting, he hasn't even played an NFL game yet, or preseason game or anything. I hope he goes on to have a long career, lots of success, all pros, Super Bowls, all of that. But I think what he can be after football could be even more important than anything he does as a football player. Like this could be a platform for him that launches him to other things. But I think his effect beyond football could be much more impactful than anything he does on a football field. And that's saying a lot. I mean, we've not, you don't hear that much about athletes in general. And I think he's that kind of leader, right? That's a special kind of person. So, hey, we've gone in, right? Oh, no, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just going to say, could I just add one more thing on this group? I think it's just that I think some people will sort of look at this and say, we talked a lot about how good a lot of these guys are, and they are, but we've also talked a lot about how good their run defense is, and those departures that we had took a lot of sacks with them. I just wanted to say that I think I'm come from this, and I think you probably have too, but we maybe didn't say it explicitly at the start, is that I'm not sure we've had for a number of years a dominant pass rusher, a guy who just wins on his own, one-on-one against an offensive tackle. Like we haven't had that much. And if you go back, and me and you are currently doing a bit of a project and looking back at the sacks and sort of why some of those things happened, I think a lot of it was scheme. And we've had that over the last couple of years. Wink is a very valuable defensive coordinator in scheming up pressure. And so I don't think that we necessarily need a dominant outside linebacker pass rusher that is going to get 15 sacks this year. I don't think we need it. I think the sacks will come from a lot of different places. I think it will come with some guys winning their one-on-one battles, but I think a lot of it will come with scheme, and a lot of it will come playing in front of this outstanding secondary. And I think we'll get some from those interior guys too. So I don't see necessarily a dominant pass rusher in this group, but I don't worry too much about that.
Yeah, you'd have to go back to Sizzle. That's probably Sizzle, Doomerville, those kinds of guys to find. But those guys are unicorns. We talk about that all the time. You can look around the league, and when you think about the absolute top pass rushers, the 32 teams, all 32 teams don't have that guy. Right. There's a reason for that. It's because those guys are unicorns. And so Wink talked about this. I think he was doing a call with like season ticket holders or something about how he thought sacks might be one of the most overrated defensive stats because of everything that goes into getting a sack. Right. It's not just about that one guy. As great as that guy may be, let's say you do have one of those unicorns like a Von Miller. But we heard Von Miller talk about how he probably had to give Derek Wolfe credit for like half of his sacks. So there's so many things that go into that. And I think you and I both understand, like, hey, sacks are great. Nobody's going to say you don't want a team that gets sacks, but pressure. And we know Wink is very good at designing pressure. Pressure is where it's at for me, because you're trying to impact the passer. I think I talked about that earlier. I said impact the QB. You're trying to impact the passer, right? Obviously, if you sack him, that's one way to impact the passer. But pressure, right, where you're making them uncomfortable. They have to speed up their processing. They have to move, off of the spot where they want to set up and kind of go through their reads or go through those progressions. All of those things affect the passer and affect the passing game. So it may not always result in a sack, but that doesn't mean that you still can't have a defense that pressures the quarterback and forces them into bad plays. So I'm never going to say you don't want sacks or like sacks, aren't important or whatever. Even he didn't say that. He didn't say they weren't important. He just said, I think it's an overrated stat because people don't really understand the context of what it takes to get a lot of sacks. So I think there was a little bit of kind of misinterpretation with that, because I think as soon as he said it, like the next day on Twitter, he doesn't think sacks are important. It's not what he said. It's not what he said. And it's not what we're saying. I think you made the point more eloquently than me that, look, they're going to be able to pressure passing games and pressure QBs without necessarily having that Von Miller or that Khalil Mack. And who knows, hopefully maybe a Dafe or Daley Hayes, one of these guys turns into that guy. That would be awesome, right? To have that guy again. But either way, I think both of us are comfortable and confident that they're going to be as they've been, whether it was under Dean Pease or now under Wink, a top defensive unit, right, in the league. I mean, that's kind of just the tradition here, and that's what it's been, particularly the last couple of years. And they haven't had that guy the last couple of years, and they've been able to. I mean, they went out and traded for a guy in that that caliber with Yannick last year, and it didn't kind of go the way that I think a lot of people thought it was going to go. So I think one thing I always have to think about their defense and remind myself is I don't know that it's really set up for that, for one guy to have, those real high sack numbers. I'm not going to say it can't happen in this defense, because obviously, when Sizzle was here, it was a different defense, slightly, because Pease was the coordinator. So it can happen, but I don't think there's a lot of pure, straight, one-on-one pass rush situations for an individual guy in this defense where you basically are just giving him the green light and say, hey, you don't have to worry about anything else. Don't worry about your rush lane integrity. You can win inside. You can win outside. You don't have to worry about contain. You just go, right? And the rest of us will make you right. I don't think that's how this defense works. So I think that if it was like that, and there are some defenses around the league that are like that, some of these guys could be 10, 11, 12 sack guys if you allowed them to do that. But I think this is more of a discipline, play your assignment sort of defense. And, everybody kind of works together, right? We all play together. And so we're, this week it might be you who makes the play. Next week it might be me who makes the play. Another week be another guy. But we're going to stay within the defense and play within the structure of the defense and be there for one another, right? So I think that sometimes gets a little bit lost in the sack numbers. How come they don't have guys with more sacks? I don't know that the defense is really set up to just let somebody go and just, pin their ears back and just do whatever the hell they want on every play. I mean, there's probably some situations for sure where guys have that green light, but I don't think generally that's the structure of the defense. So, hey, long way of saying, don't worry, relax. Right? In a nutshell.
Yeah.
That's it. Relax. Don't worry. But hey, man, James, it was awesome having you on. We're right about an hour and 31 minutes, but I don't feel bad about that because we had to talk about two different position groups, and we probably did about 35, 40 minutes on each. So if you think about it that way, that's fine. That's right where it should be.
Yeah, I thought we were going to go a lot longer than this, so I'm impressed with us.
Like, hey, I tried. I told you I was going to try, and I know I say that other times and I don't try at all, but this time I really was conscious of it, and I think that we acquitted ourselves nicely here. So again, I'll tell you, where you can follow James' work is, on Twitter at NFL Ogden, Red Star Baltimore blog, RSR. I won't be surprised if you see one of his reports in the summer showcase for Scouting Academy. So keep an eye out for when they put those out too. But just again, a pleasure, always a pleasure talking to you, James, and thanks for being on and sharing some of your afternoon there with us.
Pleasure talking to you too, MC. Thanks so much.
All right, everybody. Remember to like and subscribe. As always, two guys watching football. Remember, it's two guys. Sometimes it might be more than two guys, but it probably won't always be the same two guys. So keep tapping in with us for the rest of this training camp preview series, and we'll talk to you next time.